Since it debuted in 2015, Hideo Kojima's MGS5 has been accused in an urban legend of being unfinished. This is a virtual essay to explain why, despite all appearances, MGS5 is not only finished, it's a revolution in ludonarrativity for the social media era of the digital age. One I'd go so far as to call its very own language. Not one simple message, but an entire self-contained medium, through which not only one, but many different possible interpretations and experiences are possible. Each of them roughly as valid or true or right as any other, provided they all follow the right rules. Let's begin.
Intel file obtained.
The first most basic sense that MGS5 is a language refers to the secrets that players gradually unearth as we experience the game for the first time, and the process of revisiting previous episodes with these later reveals and hints in mind.
He doesn't even know who's paying him. All his instructions came through a cutout. Now, who else would be behind it but Cypher?
As a game largely about the power of words to arguably alter or even control the subconscious, much guilt and repressed trauma aches at this game's bleeding heart. Yet on the surface, to paraphrase Code Talker in the mission Shining Lights Even in Death,
the eggs propagate out of sight. No external symptoms. One who appears healthy may be dying on the inside.
You'd never know the subject was actually dying inside. Yet, that's what The Phantom Pain is. A game where we experience, via both story and gameplay, our player character's descent into madness. One brought on, ironically, by the incurable disease of a terrible truth. We are not the real Big Boss, only his stand-in, as we find out by the end of the game. This bait-and-switch, sleeper agent, Manchurian candidate material belies a deeper sort of castration complex. That in the end, we were perhaps the true antagonists, the true demons of the story all along.
It would appear that he was involved. Another demon who woke up from 9 years of slumber. As a result, the vocal cord parasite spread through the village.
I told you this would happen.
It was an unfortunate accident. He is becoming an annoyance. He may stumble upon the truth sooner or later, but I suppose that is really of no consequence. One day, he too will pay for what he has done.
Black Honor. The real demon is you.
You know, this incident made me realize something. You are right. I should have acted with more humility.
Weaving a complex tapestry of shame and recrimination and hypocrisy, MGS5 explores questions of guilt, sin, and punishment. As we try to run from our sins in the game, doomed in hell there, only to endlessly repeat them. And it's all taking place inside our characters' heads. The guilt and shame for, at least, the horrific events of Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes haunt our psyche in the story like a ghost, but only if we're paying enough attention to think and feel them through.
She hit the water hard, but somehow she managed to survive. Anyway, the shock triggered some kind of amnesia.
Snake? Where is Professor Galvez?
We'll have to wake up your neighbor, too.
So he's not. He seems awake now.
No. Well, he's not actively conscious yet, at least.
He was a doctor, too.
In his mind, that past no longer exists. Your past is his past now. He's going to be your phantom.
You're a legend in the eyes of those who live on the battlefield. That's why you have to handle this mission yourself. Put those 9 years behind you. and return as Big Boss.
To the world, you're now the legendary mercenary Big Boss.
Doctor, you're as useless as I thought. You and your friend will die here. You burn with the rest of them.
Not some simple diversion. He'll act as the new Big Boss, and the act just isn't for Cypher. He'll be your face on the world stage until the time comes for your resurgence.
Kept you waiting, huh? Come on. Say it for all time's sake. Kept you waiting, huh? I knew this day would come.
You make it sound easy. We've been busy over the last 9 years. His altered state of consciousness has helped us implant powerful suggestions through induced hypnagogia. He's experienced all your missions on record and shares all your knowledge and experience to make him believe that he is the one true Big Boss.
You look well rested, Big Boss. My, how you've changed. You became a demon for such little weapons as that? Well, I'm sure you'll see the bigger picture eventually.
You know the hardest man to break. The type who's fooling himself. That takes time. It's easier to live a convenient lie than a painful truth. Is that the pace you've chosen, Doc?
You, me, we've no place to run, nowhere to hide.
No one around him will doubt that he's the Big Boss they know. So, is he the real Big Boss or a stand-in? What does that mean to him? Nothing. The human brain is capable of many illusions. Of pain, of the future. What happens from here depends on his skill. You can vouch for that.
He was always the best man we had. But
9 years ago in that helicopter, he threw himself between you and the blast. In that moment, the man you knew died. He died protecting you. And now, by becoming you, he protects you again. This is just a detour in his journey to hell. And don't forget, it's what he wanted. He's in his dog days now.
Look, you can't discard your phantoms forever, Doctor. One day he'll see through the lies he's built up, realize what kind of man he really is. What goes around comes around. You can't run from yourself forever.
Now do you remember who you are? What you were meant to do? I cheated death thanks to you. And thanks to you, I've left my mark. You have too. You've written your own history. You're your own man. I'm Big Boss. And you are too. No. He's the two of us together. From here on out, we're Big Boss.
That's the genius here. It's a gamified facsimile of repression, of how repression works psychologically, of how the abused can all too often, without facing the truth before it's too late, wind up the abuser. In some sense, the real revenge that punished Venom Snake seems to seek all along is a revenge against himself. It's just sometimes impossible to separate this guilt and repression bleeding through into our memories from genuine hints towards deeper secrets nested like parasites within this game, and its many, many layers of subtext. And that brings us to the second sense that MGS5 is a kind of language. MGSV, or 5, depending on your perspective, debuted 7 years ago as a difficult game to understand.
Miller was in contact with Cypher 9 years ago. He was working with them.
Whatever the Navajo told you, it's just one possible solution derived by Cypher. My will is different.
The name of our eternal enemy in the game, Cypher, seemed to slip from everyone's lips, even from the central antagonist's, Skullface, as the enemy to hate. Yet by being omnipresent, paradoxically, it was as though the elusive Cypher remained somehow nowhere to be seen. Camouflaged. Invisible. It's because, as MGS4 explained, they've blended into the background, the very background noise of our entire world.
The network covered everything from weapons R&D and investment to production and marketing. It encompassed the people, the companies, even the laws that protect them. Politics and economics became nothing more than iterations of the same oppressively uniform system. I don't think anyone realized that it was all a setup, a mere set of norms. The Patriots were those norms, a neural network reduced to its simplest form.
The Patriots, or if you prefer, Cypher, are kept alive, kept supreme, encoded in the very words that we speak. Encoded in that dominant lingua franca, English. That's what makes them so dangerous, and compels Skullface to scheme at such dark and daring heights to try and eradicate them like a disease. But the ultimate rule in entertainment, particularly visually based entertainment, is show, don't tell. And in some ways, the mission of MGS4 to wrap up the saga in one neat little bow after another made showing, not telling us things about the Patriot system of control a difficult prospect. MGS5 serves as its predecessor's foil, though, an ultimate point of contrast. MGS5 needed to show us, in effect, the Patriots' victory as masters of our world. Needed to, and succeeded in, just in ways we didn't recognize. It showed the near impossibility of ever opposing or defeating the Patriots without damaging the very world that they've parasitized, and the very concepts we use to understand and to live within it. This game, particularly as it explored also the roots of the so-called 21st century war on terror, needed and succeeded in showing us, yes, showing us firsthand how things became in modern politics, society, and military history borderline impossible to understand or keep straight, at least for very long, and how that almost post-Tower of Babel-like confusion, again paradoxically, makes this world achieve some kind of phantom equilibrium as one. And how MGS5 achieved all this goes back to its title, that letter V, back to language, back to symbols and words, and the power of words as explanatory metaphors or tools. I submit that MGS5 as an experience was, in so many words, designed to function almost like a kind of language unto itself. Now what the hell could that mean, right? Well, recently, in a video, I compared how the essential building blocks of the game fit together analogously to a Rubik's Cube. And I think that's an image worth re-importing here. But imagine if, instead of there only being a set, single, uniform pattern, the Phantom Pain offers a kind of generative grammar quality. To quote the Oxford English Dictionary, a type of grammar which describes a language in terms of a set of logical rules formulated so as to be capable of generating the infinite number of possible sentences of that language and providing them with the correct structural description. But it may surprise you to hear that I still, even though I'm saying that it's sort of like a language that we sort of play a part in using to come up with our own meanings with, that nonetheless, I still believe there is a real structure to the Phantom Pain's narrative that we are left to piece together. You might wonder if that's not a contradiction. I'd prefer the word paradox, and it is. And that's the beauty of it. Basically, that's also the beauty of the "you're the real big boss now" ending, or part of it anyway. But let me try to explain this further with examples. As some critics were quick to note, the Phantom Pain is awash in words. Much of the story is told only auditorily by somewhat narrowing the range of thought, perhaps, in Orwell's terms, via the mini cassette tapes that we uncover throughout the game. This ocean of words cleverly conceals the game's central conceit in plain sight, hiding, to borrow Skullface's metaphor, a needle in a stack of needles. In effect, MGS5 is a masterwork in something like linguistic engineering, and the tapes are key to this. And it's all just what the game itself explains about Cypher or the Patriots and what they've done to communication in the digital age.
America is a country of liberty, a meeting of immigrants. Instead of simply assimilating, its citizens live alongside others. Their roots are very diverse. America's never been made up of just one group. But he tried to forge a single consciousness for it and from it.
Oh, and they've got a name for Anderson's AI project. It's called the Patriots. It's all about ensuring that the concepts driving society appears the same in the mind of each person in that society. About maintaining the identity of the individual, and yet having that individual willingly make up part of the whole. I guess it's fitting to call that patriotism.
The idea that every citizen would use free will to unite behind their country. Unilateralism like that can't be entrusted to any one individual. So the Major sought a system that used information, words, to control the subconscious.
From here on out, you're on your own. From here on out! You will be my eyes. The deadliest enemy's right here in our midst.
From here on out, you're Big Boss.
Oh, and they've got a name for Anderson's AI project. It's called the Patriots. It's all about ensuring that the concepts driving society appears the same in the mind of each person in that society. About maintaining the identity of the individual, and yet having that individual willingly make up part of the whole. I guess it's fitting to call that patriotism.
Analysis complete.
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context?
That's why we must depend on information control. People need an appropriate context for their lives. A context that's stimulating without being destructive. That balance is the basis of equilibrium.
You mean to say people will blindly accept your context without developing any allergies?
If we're to unite the world, literacy must be suppressed. To suppress the information immune system, to borrow your metaphor.
Immunity to information. But to ensure there's no allergic reaction, while the immune system fights off parasites and pathogens.
It's done, Exo. This world will become one. I have found the way.
We're just given contexts, many different possible interpretations and variations that we ourselves forge along common themes.
I was just trying to prove our innocence to the world. What's wrong with that?
We're not interested in the excuses you've thought up. The truth is objective.
Just see it from my point of view.
You led XOF to the control tower. They seized it, giving them complete control over the base. Moments later, they detonated C4 on the strut legs. Anyone who'd managed to survive was hunted down by the assault force and their choppers.
You can't believe I did that on purpose.
You're not a victim here, Emmerich. You're the perpetrator.
I didn't know anything.
Nobody can back that up.
Yeah, all the evidence is at the bottom of the ocean.
This is a bottomless V-shaped rabbit hole players could very well remain within more or less forever, but it will get clearer with more examples, so let's just pick a few. The Phantom Pain excels at stimulating a lot of curiosity, terror, and excitement around extraordinary characters and names like Cypher, the Patriots, the Skulls, Quiet, the Man on Fire, or the Third Boy, just to name a few. But imagine it was more like data, digital data, with bits of it missing. Bits or chunks of the final image were somehow degraded, painted over, some of them even lost forever. It would take some time to decrypt.
Boss, retrieve the film canister our informant hid in Spookmate Keep before he died. It contains vital information on Skullface's plan. For now, our only clue is the garbled photograph the informant tried to send us before the end. We're working on analyzing the data. There's no time to wait.
We even see this in one of the missions of the game, where it takes them some time and they are able to decrypt more and more of that image. That mission extraordinary is a very key piece to the puzzle of what I'm sort of forwarding here. It is gradually decrypted more and more, but even then, it's just showing you the general area, and you still have to figure it out and find it for yourself, how to get there and how to, complete the mission. So I think that's sort of a vertical slice almost, or a sort of a miniaturization of the whole concept of the game in that very simple mission. Whatever shapes or patterns that we could fit into these blank missing spaces in the data, provided they meshed with the bits of data that we do have, well, those ones that we've imposed would be just as good as any other, so long as they fit, right? Fit the rules of the shape of it, right? Does that make sense? So if we take something like the Patriots as an example, we're given intel, and this is, by the way, a big secret that was lurking at the heart of the game, something that I figured out in my What Even Happens in MGS5 trilogy, that Strangelove, the AI specialist from the game Peace Walker, was, before she died in that lab in Afghanistan, actually helping create an early version of the Patriot Proxy AI network.
The AI, bound by specific rules, filters the massive amounts of data it collects before passing it on to people, subtly guiding their decision-making. A system of the people, by the people, for the people. So they began researching how to do it. DARPA apparently brought Strangelove on board to head it up. She was forced out after a certain incident. The direction of the project and any trace of her existence was scrubbed after her departure.
Ocelot tells us this more or less explicitly. But does he really? It would just be up to you to sort of fit that in if that didn't match your sort of sense of things.
Snake. It's not you, is it?
Hey! It's just a machine.
Regardless of how we micromanage our inductive reasoning by way of speculation and so on here, there is a kind of almost scientific mentality to take when researching or investigating the Phantom Pain. A courtroom logic, if you will.
Dr. Emmerich.
Snake? Hey, what gives?
Unambiguously, Strangelove clearly did at some point build the foundation for the Patriots as an AI network, using the boss's AI to do so. And though she wanted to recreate the boss's will as a literal recreation of her mentality, the project was altered to become a rules-driven, non-unilateral, relatively fail-safe system, which was more about filtering and controlling the flow of information. And in this system, coinciding, by the way, exactly with the language of a structure that MGS5 has itself, that system works by essentially duping each individual who's inside of it into believing that the world that you think you know is the same world for anybody else. That you can, in other words, can believe what your eyes and ears tell you. That you can investigate and learn and figure this stuff out for yourself. Except you can't in every case. I think there will be pieces to the digital data there that is going to be left out, and filling them in is not going to be possible except with a dash of faith. faith that would be open to argument and interpretation, pretty much forever. So to say that it's unfinished, there's different senses of that word. It's left to us to figure out what we make of these things and how we put it together.
They do something to your eyes? No, it's just bright as all.
You will be my eyes.
But at the same time, it being that way is part of what it's supposed to be. So in that sense, it is finished. And I don't know if that makes any sense. Hopefully, this is making it a little clearer. I'll point out also that this whole thing that I'm describing, it sort of resembles a V, kind of like the laser-formed one, which we see whenever Venom Snake, uses his eye droid, his own little window into the place he thinks is the world, the real world, that is. A world laden with paradoxes that cannot, virtually and in many different ways, cannot exist in the way we see it. And yet we do see it. We see and hear it.
Sahelanthropus? How?
Tape's rolling, boss.
How about it, Cos? Looks like our client just got outbid.
We got the recording. Objective accomplished.
See and hear its paradox of an existence crystal clearly with our own eyes and ears, just like, say, witnessing something truly history-making, like an assassination or a terror attack. These massive events in history, they've been twisted by people on all different sides. What they really meant in of themselves starts to matter a lot less than what people take them to mean.
You mentioned something interesting. The reason why they pulled their plug on the operation in Afghanistan. He said their funding started going to Central Africa instead. Cypher is pursuing new research in Africa.
Africa? What research?
The point is that just as there is no finite limit to the number of new ideas and thoughts you could theoretically express within any given language, provided you follow its rules of grammar, the whats and the whens of MGS5, much like beauty or truth, depend somewhat on the eye of the beholder. But it does it in a way that it doesn't totally break the freedom or the right, if you will, of the other person to determine in an almost democratic way, to decide for themselves what it all means. And this, of course, takes us all back in the most beautiful way to Skullface's sort of final monologues at the end of Ground Zeroes, of what he says to Paz, which doubles, I would argue, in many ways, as a little sort of love letter or hate letter or something to the player.
You shall not see triumph. You've been most helpful, and I have one last use for you. To you I give a magnificent end, but an end nonetheless. The final moment is yours.
This could also be, captured under the banner of something called relativism, something associated with the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a big influence on the game, but something that has never been expressed like this by any medium before. And it makes The Phantom Pain one of the greatest single works, probably ever. That's obviously my opinion, right? What makes this structure genius is that it makes The Phantom Pain the ultimate political work for the modern era, as it allows itself to bury the stuff that isn't left up to us to decide for ourselves, that stuff that can be decrypted, right, that hasn't been lost. That stuff is buried deep in an endless pool of ambiguity in language games. Kind of like the question of even finding out that Strangelove worked on this huge project took a lot of work to basically decrypt it, decipher it, decode it. This brings the core concepts of code talking, of secrets and information control and neo-totalitarianism, all of these sort of concepts, it makes them come alive in ways that only an interactive medium like video games ever could. It's meant to be scary how easily in the dark dystopian world of MGS5 information, facts, data can disappear down memory holes. How easily truths can just get painted over, get altogether rewritten or forgotten. MGS5, simply put, was, before the term was even popular, the ultimate post-truth game. Each of us playing in a microcosmic metaphor for our daily lives inside today's 21st century information-rich, globalized, Englishized society, shrouded behind the Major's technological veil, as the game calls it, each in our own little garden, own version of reality, a veritable multiverse, together alone, and each of us wearing the same face. MGS5 was perhaps only a language insofar as it represented a social media age grand experiment in relativity. It manages to make it so that not literally any idea or interpretation is just as valid as any other. Whatever formulation you wind up with, if played by the hidden rules and according to all the embedded intel from the tapes, only indirectly, will fit the requirements of the language's rules, almost allowing us, the players, like Punish Venom Snake for Big Boss, to act as Kojima Productions' proxy, as their very own sleeper agents in the field. It's just that whatever version of the truth we ultimately land on will belong to and depend on us. Whatever cause we take up as the one true Big Boss, ignoring the paradox of the existence of all the others, will belong to us and depend on us, the game's code-talking interpreters. Each in our very own individualized ACC, our own unique corner in the helicopter where Venom Snake tries to make sense of the world, well, his world anyway. MGS5 isn't unfinished because it's an entire language. In any language, the number of new statements or possible permutive combinations is basically limitless. Even the dictionary, which itself has to be periodically updated with new words, does not contain all there is to, say, English. Words and grammar rules structure the game of communication, but it's up to us how that game is played. The same, I submit, holds essentially true for MGS5. It is a game and a tool the player uses to craft meaning and complete the Metal Gear saga on our own terms. But what's crucial to grasp is that a language's applications may be basically limitless in theory, but not in practice. In practice, each language arguably has its limits, its range of expressible thought. I'll give two key examples for MGSV, or 5. In the novel 1984, a poet remarks that, quote, "The whole history of English poetry has been determined by the fact that the English language lacks rhymes," end quote. The novel's author, George Orwell, believed in something called linguistic relativity, that our thoughts rely upon language and are thereby controllable or corruptible from within by controlling or corrupting the language. The second example comes from the history of communist China. More than any other version of totalitarianism, Maoism prioritized the importance of language control. Whole words were purged from the official lexicon, so that for a time there was no Chinese poetry containing words like, to quote Kai Strittmater's "We have been harmonized," quote, "sun, earth, water, and death," end quote. What Orwell fictionalized, the Chinese systematized. The purpose was to narrow the possible range of thought, to control not any one particular message or another, but control the entire medium of communication. I bring this up because by saying MGS5 is a language, I don't mean to say it's a game without solid shape, without a real ending, or at least one that we don't make up entirely by ourselves, one that could mean or be made to mean anything. There are rules and guidelines, or in Ocelot's words, protocols. In Marxist terms, you could call the phantom pain a superstructure. When paired with the player base, in biological terms, it's a kind of, well, a superorganism. But whatever you want to call it, MGS5 has concrete rules and a general structure. It has a finite range for what's possible to get it to mean. It's just up to us to study those rules very carefully, by, for example, listening and re-listening to tapes, and then put them into practice by deriving possible solutions to its many, many mysteries and ambiguities, testing them against the data, making sure that they fit. But there will never be, as I keep stressing, an objective, a completely filled out objective answer. Poetry, after all, is the most ambiguous art form of all. And MGS5 is nothing if not poetic. Words are what keep a world alive, MGS5 explains, and words are only alive when they're inside living human hosts. An individual dies, but versions of them live on in the memories of those they leave behind. MGSV suggests that in a more conventional, unilateral form of storytelling, it's only a matter of time before the original author's intent gets drowned out by the flood of interpretations. This is sometimes called the theory of the death of the author.
Ever since the attack on your unit 9 years ago, the name Big Boss has become known the world over.
What do you mean?
Those of your men who survived traveled far and wide. They fought throughout the world. In fact, they're part of the reason we have all these PFs now. Every one of them suffered their own phantom pain from losing you. Talking about you wherever they went helped to heal their wounds. Your actions and words, your legend, has been told on every battlefield they've set foot on. Obviously, as the tales have spread, the truth's been distorted, painted over. Big Boss sacrificed himself to show us the threat that Cypher poses. He sounded a warning, so it goes.
A warning?
Too much power destroys the hands that hold it. Apparently, you chose to be a living example of that.
I never said any of that.
The moment any truth is passed on, it starts turning into fiction. The problem is, fiction inspires people more than facts. The lessons you've taught the PFs are the reason they're so widespread. They're the reason they've survived. Zero's will is already fading into a shadow of what it once was. Systems, guidelines, rules, laws. When you take a mentality and fix it in a solid shape, put it out there in the hands of people, it can only begin to decay. No mentality can last forever. When the body dies, the will dies with it. Human will should only be handed down and nurtured by human hands. It can't be entrusted to the system, especially not that soulless phantom that Zero's left in his wake. No matter what happens, we'll have to fight someday to reclaim our truth. Until next time, Big Boss.
What you first meant for a thing to mean as the author, once it's out there, given enough time, it can only begin to decay. Or so held true prior to MGS5.
Let the world be. Sans lingua franca, the world will be torn asunder, and then it shall be free. People will suffer, of course, a phantom pain. The world will need a new common tongue, a language of nukes. My metal gears shall be the thread by which all countries are bound together in equality. No words will be needed. Every man will be forced to recognize his neighbor. People will swallow their pain. They will link lost hands. The world will become one. This war is peace.
What if you created a story with the structure of a so-called black box? In this model, you look at inputs and outputs, but not the system itself, which you figure out indirectly through a process of reverse engineering.
Hewick's strength is that it has a cutout at each level. You get your job from one guy, then you hand it off to another. No one has direct access. It's a perfect black box.
The criticality trigger, that is, the detonator, is a complete black box design.
If applied to a story in a video game, anything you plug into the black box that lines up with the given inputs and the right outputs could fit. So the death of the author principle would thereby sort of be defeated by designing it in, not as a bug, but as a feature. This is a weird analogy, but take the Annie Murphy episode of the Netflix show Murderville. Each episode's guest is tasked with serving essentially as the player of something like a video game like MGS5. They're given all the pieces of a murder mystery and then challenged to determine the true culprit. In Murphy's episode, her specific rationale was really out of left field, but it didn't matter because the inputs, the clues she was given, matched the required output. She gave the correct answer, which the strange logic had led her to. It didn't matter that the specific connections the writers intended Murphy to make, she repeatedly didn't, because the connections she did make in her own head led her to the real right answer. So whether we go by the writer's or Murphy's train of thought is, on some level, irrelevant. Both fulfill the same function well enough. Ambiguity is how to allow room for both without the paradox of contradiction. Plug back into MGS5, here let's return to the case of the enemy organization, Cypher. Whether that word refers to the Cypher of Skullface, of the Patriots, or of Major Zero, it's almost always left ambiguous. That means that whichever of these three you're thinking of, you will probably be in some sense right. It makes no practical difference. Did Skullface attack MSF by himself? Did he do it for the Patriots, or did he do it for Zero? Any of these three is possible, and in all three cases, it's still a form of Cypher that's responsible. Provided the player doesn't accuse, say, Nuke the Cat as the mastermind, and lands on one of the three right possible answers, they're still properly playing out their role as the investigator, as the truth assembler of this game. By designing MGS5 this way, or rather designing the metagame that sort of is involved with playing it parasitically, Kojima has created a multilateral language instead of a unilateral story. That's why, instead of just decaying, MGS5, once it's left Kojima's hand, has only begun to evolve, kept alive as it's shaped by our hands. Another kind of language, in a way, is a political party, like the one in power in Orwell's 1984. The individual is no match for the collective, which is why Kojima himself had to, on some level, disappear. That's his victory in the end. By building the foundation for something as eternal and meaningful as a language or political party, Kojima has the death of the author's last laugh. To invert the famous Patriot slogan from the 18th century, out of one, many. Each of us, by playing MGSV and letting it live on in our hearts and minds, by replaying the game and re-listening to the tapes and crafting new theories, and by sharing them on social media, we're all joining in the revolutionary collaborative experience of creating and finishing and sharing this game. It's just that by design, there will almost always be room for new interpretations. It's not that there are no wrong answers. It's impossible to know that we've found all the right ones. And in that sense, that game, that process of finding new answers and asking new questions, will never be game over. Just as the revolution in 1984 will, by design, never be over because the party language, Newspeak, will never be complete. It will remain a process of ever-refined brutality, a system always approaching perfection, but never obtaining it. That endless process is exactly how the process itself stays alive. I will end for now with a serious mystery the game leaves us with, one that I'm still, probably in vain, trying to authoritatively solve. And that mystery is what Cypher was doing in the Devil's House using children. Listen to this shocking secret intel drop and think over what it might mean. Until next time, boss. Just remember, though, that the final moment is yours.
Ina metodi bo kesadilaka zana kulonguka mutu mbote komersa ina mutu kangaka mono banduku na mono kukumaka bima na poya kulongukila tangu komersa talaka na kati ya izini ya waka mboma poso yandi mimona diabulu na mina mavuanga kutaka na izini yo yina muswaka chance ya kutina mubanzaka ndekefwa yandi munu mosi kana mbila munikaka kasi lima nyonso kebetisa kabatu mingi kikatukaka na izini yina maladi na bwala ina
caution
masakita,
rain approaching
ova mbingayo malchance ya kuta lufunu Sambubo vafuaka ntete batuina vandaka munoko tiambu ya kuituka hata mwana mosi ve kubelaka malira koko kakave tibubu bukesadila kaka bana fioti sambuna lulula mono